The night had always haunted her. Even though she couldn't remember it, she felt it in her bones, in the quiet whispers of her parents when they thought she wasn't listening, in the way their eyes darkened whenever she asked about the fire. Ava had lived her entire life believing she had barely escaped death as a baby. Her parents had told her the same story over and over, a tragic accident, a house engulfed in flames, and a miracle that had saved her life. They had lost everything that night, their home, their belongings, but they had her, and that was all that mattered. She had never questioned it. Not really. Until the day everything changed. It started with a simple discovery, a box tucked away in the attic, buried beneath old clothes and forgotten memories. Ava had been searching for childhood pictures for a school project when she stumbled upon it. The box was old, its edges worn, and when she lifted the lid, she found a stack of newspaper clippings, yellowed with age. The headline on the top one sent a chill through her. Local family's home burns down, arson suspected. Arson. Ava's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. The articles spoke of an investigation, of authorities searching for answers, of a fire that had not been an accident. But what made her blood run cold was the mention of an unknown suspect, someone who had deliberately set the fire. Someone who had wanted them gone. Her mind spun with questions. Why had her parents never told her this? Had they known? And if so, what else had they kept from her? That night at dinner, she couldn't sit still. She studied her parents closely, noticing things she had overlooked before. The nervous way her mother glanced at her father before answering certain questions. The way her father always avoided talking about the past. She waited until they were cleaning up, then finally asked, "Was our house fire really an accident?" Her mother froze, a plate slipping from her hands and shattering against the floor. Her father's jaw tightened. "Ava," he said carefully, "why would you ask that?" She took a deep breath. "I found old newspaper articles. They said it was arson. That someone set the fire on purpose." Silence. The kind that made her chest tighten. Her mother turned away, gripping the counter. Her father sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. "We were trying to protect you," he said. "You were so young. We thought if you didn't know, you wouldn't have to live with that fear." Ava's stomach twisted. "Who did it?" Her mother shook her head. "We don't know." But there was something in her eyes, something Ava couldn't ignore. They knew more than they were telling her. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with possibilities. If someone had set that fire on purpose, had they meant to hurt her family? Or, had she been the target? The next morning, she made a decision. She needed to find the truth. And she wouldn't stop until she did. The next morning, Ava sat on the edge of her bed, her mind still spinning. She had spent half the night scrolling through old news archives online, searching for any mention of the fire, but there wasn't much beyond what she had already found. The articles all said the same thing: a house fire, a family barely making it out, and an arson investigation that had gone cold. No arrests. No suspects named. Nothing. But the way her parents had reacted told her there was more to the story. They were hiding something, and now that she knew the fire wasn't an accident, she couldn't ignore it. She grabbed her phone and scrolled through her contacts. There was only one person she could think of who might remember something: her aunt, Julia. Ava had always liked Julia. She was her mom's younger sister, and while she didn't visit often, she had a way of speaking the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. If anyone would tell her what really happened, it was her. After a few rings, Julia picked up. "Hey, kiddo. What's up?" Ava hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Aunt Julia. I need to ask you something about the fire." Silence. Then, a sigh. "I was wondering when you'd start asking questions." Ava's heart pounded. "So, you know?" "Of course, I know," Julia said, her voice quieter now. "But it's not my story to tell. Your parents, they kept it from you for a reason." "But why?" Ava's voice cracked. "Why won't they tell me the truth?" Another pause. Then, Julia said something that made Ava's skin crawl. "Because the truth is dangerous." A chill ran through her. "What do you mean?" she whispered. Julia lowered her voice. "Ava, listen to me. If you start digging, you need to be careful. There are things about that night your parents don't want you to know. People they don't want you to remember. Ava's stomach twisted. People? Julia hesitated, then sighed again. I've already said too much. Just, don't push too hard, okay? The line went dead. Ava stared at her phone, her pulse racing. People they didn't want her to remember. That meant there had been someone else involved. Someone her parents were afraid of. The next few days, Ava couldn't focus on anything else. She kept thinking about what Julia had said, replaying every conversation she had ever had with her parents about the fire, looking for clues she had missed. She even tried bringing it up again, but they shut her down immediately. Her dad's voice had been firm. Drop it, Ava. But how could she? One afternoon, after school, she made a decision. If her parents wouldn't tell her the truth, she would find it herself. She started at the library, scrolling through old newspaper records, but everything she found just repeated what she already knew. Then, on a hunch, she searched police reports from that year. And that's when she found something strange. The report mentioned an unknown male seen near the house before the fire. A witness had described him as a tall man in a dark coat, standing across the street, watching the house just hours before the flames erupted. But there was no follow-up. No interviews. Nothing. It was as if the lead had been ignored. Ava's fingers trembled as she took a screenshot of the file. She had never heard of a stranger being seen that night. Why hadn't her parents ever mentioned this? Her mind was racing now. There was someone out there who knew the truth. Someone who had been there that night. And she needed to find him. But as she left the library, stepping out into the cool evening air, a strange feeling crept over her. Like she was being watched. Ava's steps slowed as she walked away from the library. The air felt different, thicker, heavier. She glanced over her shoulder, scanning the quiet street. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Cars rolled past, and a few people walked along the sidewalk, but no one stood out. Still, the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. She pulled her jacket tighter around her and quickened her pace. Maybe she was just being paranoid. After all, she had spent the last few days diving into something her parents clearly didn't want her to. Maybe that was making her see danger where there was none. When she got home, her mother was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. The smell of garlic filled the air, but Ava barely noticed. She hesitated in the doorway, wondering if she should say something, ask again about the man in the police report, but the tension from their last conversation still lingered. Instead, she mumbled a quick hello and slipped upstairs. In her room, she opened her laptop and pulled up the police report again. The witness who had seen the man was listed at the bottom, a woman named Eleanor Price. Ava's heart pounded. If this woman had seen something, maybe she could finally get answers. A quick search online led Ava to an address not far from town. An assisted living center. Ava's stomach clenched. Eleanor must be elderly now. Would she even remember? Would she be willing to talk? She decided to find out. The next afternoon, after school, Ava made up an excuse about studying at a friend's house and took the bus to the facility. It was a quiet place, surrounded by trees, with a garden in the front where a few residents sat chatting. She stepped inside, her hands clammy as she approached the front desk. "Hi," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I'm looking for Eleanor Price. I was hoping to ask her about something from a long time ago." The receptionist glanced up. "Are you family?" Ava hesitated. No, but it's important." The woman gave her a curious look but eventually nodded. "She's in the sunroom. Down the hall, second door on the right." Ava murmured a thank you and made her way down the hall. Her heart pounded as she reached the doorway. Inside, an elderly woman with silver hair sat by the window, a soft shawl draped over her shoulders. She was staring outside, lost in thought. Ava took a deep breath and stepped in. "Mrs. Price?" The woman turned slowly, her eyes studying Ava. "Yes." Ava swallowed hard. "I read an old police report. About a fire. You were a witness." For a moment, Eleanor didn't react. Then, a flicker of recognition crossed her face. She sat up a little straighter. "The house," she murmured. "The fire on Maple Street." Ava nodded. You saw someone that night. A man. Eleanor's expression darkened. She glanced toward the doorway, as if checking to see if they were alone. Then, she leaned in slightly. You shouldn't be asking about this. Ava's stomach twisted. Please. I need to know. Eleanor was silent for a long time. Then, in a hushed voice, she said, I saw him standing across the street. Just watching. He was tall, broad-shouldered. He wasn't some stranger passing by. He was waiting for something. Ava shivered. Did you tell the police? Eleanor nodded. I did. But they never followed up. And later, someone warned me to forget about it. Ava's pulse quickened. Who? Eleanor's gaze met hers. A man I didn't recognize. He came to my house a few days later. Told me it was best to let it go. To stop asking questions. Ava's breath caught. Someone had deliberately buried the truth. Eleanor reached for her hand, her grip surprisingly strong. If you're looking for answers, be careful, child. Some secrets aren't meant to be uncovered. Ava nodded slowly, her mind racing. Someone had covered up the truth about the fire. Someone who didn't want anyone to know what really happened that night. As she left the facility, stepping back onto the street, that feeling of being watched crept over her again. She glanced around, but no one seemed to be paying attention to her. Still, she couldn't shake the thought. If someone had tried to silence Eleanor all those years ago, what would they do now that Ava was digging, too? Ava couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following her. The warning from Eleanor Price kept replaying in her mind. Someone had wanted her to forget about the fire, someone powerful enough to make sure even the police never pursued the lead. But why? What was it about that night that had to be buried? As she walked home, she kept glancing over her shoulder, expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. But the streets were empty, the quiet only making her more uneasy. She turned the corner onto her block and felt her breath hitch. A black car was parked across the street from her house. The windows were tinted, the engine off, but something about it felt off. Her heart pounded as she hurried inside, locking the door behind her. That night, she barely slept. Every creak in the house made her sit up, her pulse racing. At one point, she swore she saw headlights flash through her window, but when she looked outside, the street was empty. The next morning, she decided she couldn't keep this to herself anymore. She needed to talk to Julia again. Maybe this time, her aunt would give her the full truth. Ava texted Julia and asked to meet somewhere private. Her aunt responded quickly, sending an address, a small coffee shop on the edge of town. When Ava arrived, Julia was already there, sitting in the corner booth, her expression tense. She motioned for Ava to sit. Tell me everything, Julia said, leaning forward. Ava took a deep breath and recounted everything, finding the police report, visiting Eleanor, the black car outside her house. Julia listened without interrupting, her fingers gripping her coffee cup so tightly her knuckles turned white. When Ava finished, Julia sighed heavily. I was afraid of this, she murmured. Ava's stomach twisted. Afraid of what? Julia hesitated, then lowered her voice. Ava, the fire wasn't random. It wasn't an accident. Your parents knew exactly who was behind it. Ava felt a chill run down her spine. Who? Julia glanced around, as if making sure no one was listening. There was a man. Someone your father used to work with. They had a falling out, something about money, a deal gone wrong. He made threats, but your dad didn't take them seriously. And then, the fire happened. Ava's hands clenched into fists. Why didn't they tell me? Julia shook her head. Because they were scared. Because they thought if they kept quiet, it would all go away. She hesitated, then added, and because he's still out there. Ava's blood ran cold. You mean, he's still watching us? Julia nodded slowly. If you've started asking questions, then he knows. And if that car was outside your house, then he's already noticed you. Ava swallowed hard. Everything suddenly felt very real. This wasn't just a mystery anymore, this was dangerous. But she wasn't going to stop. She had to find out the truth. Even if it meant facing the man who had tried to erase her family all those years ago. Ava sat frozen in the coffee shop, her mind racing. The fire wasn't an accident. The man responsible was still out there. And now, he knew she was asking questions. Every instinct told her to stop, to pretend she hadn't uncovered anything, to go back to life as it was. But she couldn't. She needed answers. Julia's expression was grim as she reached into her purse and pulled out an old envelope. She slid it across the table. Ava hesitated before picking it up. The paper was yellowed with age, the edges slightly crumpled. She carefully opened it and unfolded the letter inside. It was a handwritten note, the ink faded but still legible. "You were warned. Walk away, or you'll lose more than your home." Ava's hands trembled as she read the words. The date on the letter was just a few days after the fire. "My sister, your mom, she found this in the mailbox the morning after they moved into a motel," Julia said, her voice quiet. "She never told the police. She never told anyone except me." Ava felt a lump rise in her throat. Why didn't she leave town? Why didn't she do something? Julia sighed. "Because she thought staying quiet would keep you safe." Ava clenched her jaw. "And now I've put myself in danger." Julia reached across the table, gripping Ava's hand. "It's not your fault. But we have to be smart about this." Ava nodded, but she was already forming a plan in her mind. She wasn't going to back down. She had to find out who this man was. Later that night, back in her room, she searched through every record she could find online. Her dad's old business, former associates, any hint of a fallout that could have led to something as drastic as arson. Hours passed, and just when she thought she had hit another dead end, she found it. An article from over a decade ago. A business deal gone wrong. The lawsuit that followed. And a name, Martin Holloway. Ava's pulse quickened. She clicked through more links, scanning for any trace of him. He had been a powerful investor once, but after the lawsuit, he disappeared from public records. No recent addresses, no photos, no social media. It was like he had vanished. Or maybe, he had gone underground. Ava took a shaky breath. If he was the man her parents feared, if he had been behind the fire, then he had gotten away with it. And now, he knew she was looking for him. A noise outside made her stiffen. A soft shuffle, the crunch of gravel. Slowly, she crept to her window and peeked through the blinds. The black car was back. Parked just beyond the streetlight's glow. Ava's heart pounded in her chest. Someone was watching. Waiting. Then, just as suddenly as she noticed it, the car's headlights flicked on. The engine rumbled to life, and it pulled away into the darkness. Ava took a shaky breath, her mind spinning. This wasn't just about the past anymore. Martin Holloway wasn't done. And now, he was watching her. Ava's breath was shallow as she stepped away from the window. The black car was gone, but the feeling of being watched lingered. She had no doubt now Martin Holloway was out there, and he knew she was onto him. She had to act fast. She grabbed her phone and called Julia. The car was outside again, she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "I think it was him." Julia's silence on the other end sent a chill through her. "Ava, listen to me," she finally said. "You need to get out of there. Right now." Ava swallowed hard. "I'm not running." "You don't understand," Julia pressed. "Your dad, he never told you the full story. Holloway didn't just threaten them after the fire, he sent someone. Someone dangerous. Your dad barely got away that night." Ava's hands trembled as she gripped the phone. "And you're telling me this now? I thought it was over." Julia's voice cracked. "Your parents believed if they kept quiet, he would leave them alone. But if he knows you're looking, he won't stop." Ava's mind was spinning. She needed proof, something she could take to the police. If she could expose Holloway, maybe she could finally put an end to this nightmare. She pulled up the files she had found online, old business records, court cases, anything that linked her father to Holloway. But nothing directly tied him to the fire. No hard evidence. And then, her eyes landed on something. A property record. An old warehouse, registered under a shell company that traced back to Holloway. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Was she really about to do this? Before she could second-guess herself, she grabbed her keys and slipped out the back door. The warehouse was across town, abandoned for years, but something told her it wasn't truly empty. As she neared the rusted gates, her stomach twisted. A single dim light flickered inside. Someone was there. She crept closer, pressing herself against the wall, listening. Voices. Low, muffled. Then, footsteps. She ducked behind a stack of wooden pallets just as a figure stepped into view. A tall man, his silhouette sharp against the dim light. Even in the shadows, she could feel the weight of his presence. Martin Holloway. Ava's pulse pounded in her ears. She pulled out her phone, trying to steady her shaking hands as she hit record. "We have a problem," Holloway was saying to someone she couldn't see. "She's digging too deep. Just like her father." Ava's stomach twisted. "We should have finished this years ago," the second voice replied. "What do you want to do?" There was a long pause. Then, Holloway said coldly, "Make sure she stops asking questions." Ava's breath caught in her throat. She had to get out of there. Now. As she turned to move, her foot slipped against loose gravel. The noise echoed in the silence. The voices stopped. "Who's there?" Ava bolted. She sprinted toward the exit, heart hammering, but heavy footsteps pounded behind her. A hand reached out, barely missing her jacket as she shoved through the door and into the night. She ran until her lungs burned, not stopping until she reached her car. Hands shaking, she fumbled with the keys, the engine roaring to life just as she saw a figure step out of the warehouse, watching her. She peeled away, her mind racing. She had it. A recording of Holloway admitting everything. But before she could feel relief, her phone buzzed. A blocked number. She hesitated, then answered. A slow, deliberate breath came through the line. Then a voice. "You should have stayed quiet, Ava." The call ended. Ava's hands tightened on the steering wheel. No more running. No more fear. She was going to expose Holloway. And this time, he wouldn't get away with it. Ava's hands gripped the steering wheel, her breath coming fast. The call had ended, but the voice still echoed in her ears. Holloway knew. He knew she had been at the warehouse. He knew she had heard everything. And now, he was warning her, no, threatening her. She couldn't go home. That was the first thing she knew for sure. If Holloway had someone following her, she couldn't risk leading them back to her apartment. Instead, she drove straight to Julia's house. The moment Julia opened the door and saw Ava's pale face, she pulled her inside. What happened? Ava didn't waste time. She played the recording on her phone, Holloway's voice filling the quiet space. When it ended, Julia sat back, eyes wide with shock. "This is it," Ava said, her voice steady now. "This is the proof." Julia nodded, but there was hesitation in her eyes. "You have to be careful. People like Holloway, they don't go down without a fight." Ava knew that. But she also knew she couldn't let fear stop her. They spent the next few hours making copies of the recording, backing it up on different devices, and sending it to trusted contacts. By morning, Ava had turned everything over to an investigative journalist she knew would expose the truth. The news broke within hours. Business tycoon Martin Holloway under investigation for arson and threats. The headlines spread like wildfire. Old cases were reopened. Former employees came forward with their own accounts of intimidation and corruption. Holloway's empire, built on power and fear, was finally crumbling. But Ava wasn't naive. She knew this wasn't over. Not yet. 2 nights later, she noticed the black car again. Parked near Julia's house. Watching. Waiting. She didn't run. Instead, she stepped outside and stood in the glow of the porch light. A silent challenge. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, the car's engine rumbled to life, and it pulled away. Ava let out a slow breath. Holloway was losing control. He had always operated in the shadows, using fear to keep people quiet. But now, the world was watching. And he knew it. A week later, the police arrested Martin Holloway. The evidence was overwhelming, and without his usual protection, he had nowhere to hide. Ava stood outside the courthouse, watching as he was led away in handcuffs. Their eyes met for a brief second. There was no anger in his expression. No desperation. Just cold acceptance. As if he had always known this day would come. Ava didn't smile. There was no victory in this moment, only justice. She turned away, exhaling a breath she felt like she had been holding for years. For the first time in her life, she finally felt free.